This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is brought to you by Bookburners, an urban fantasy for fans of Dresden Files and the X-Files. Bookburners is a production of Serial Box, which brings you serialized fiction from teams of today's best writers. To get a discount on the first season of any Serial Box series, visit serialbox.com and use the promo code GEEK18.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 292 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the new science fiction anthology show Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams, which is available now on Amazon Prime. And this will include spoilers for the first 10 episodes of the show, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got our producer, John Joseph Adams. He's the editor of Lightspeed and Nightmare magazines, and he also oversees John Joseph Adams Books, an imprint of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. He's the series editor of The Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and he's also edited many other books, including the dystopian anthology Brave New Worlds, and the anthology of video game-themed stories Press Start to Play. So John, welcome back.
Always good to be here, if indeed I am here and am not just a duplicate of some sort of alien variety.
The next up, we've got Sarah Lynn Mishner making her fifth appearance on the show. She's a Ravenclaw Trekkie maker feminist who writes at Medium and crafts laser-cut jewelry and soap with swear words inside. She lives in Northern California with a Renaissance engineer, a dog, and a bird. So Sarah, welcome to the show.
Always happy to be here.
And also joining us today is Anthony Ha, who's also making his fifth appearance on the show. He covers media, advertising, and pop culture for the news site TechCrunch, where he also hosts the podcast Original Content. A chapbook of his short stories called Love Songs for Monsters was published by Youth in Decline in 2014, and he taught a class on Philip K. Dick as a student at Stanford. So Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And today's show is brought to you by Bookburners, about a team of secret agents that hunts down dangerous books containing deadly magic. Bookburners is a production of Serial Box, a new company that brings you serialized fiction from teams of today's best writers. The team behind Bookburners includes Max Gladstone, Margaret Dunlap, Brian Francis Slattery, Andrea Phillips, and Mur Lafferty, who was our guest back in episode 86. And here's a description of the book. It says, "Magic is real and hungry. It's trapped in ancient texts and artifacts, and only a few who discover it survive to fight back. Detective Sal Brooks is a survivor. She joins a Vatican-backed Black Ops anti-magic squad, Team 3 of the Societas Librorum Occultorum, and together they stand between humanity and the magical apocalypse. Some call them the Bookburners. They don't like the label. It's supernatural meets the Da Vinci Code in this fast-paced, kick-ass, character-driven novel chock full of magic, mystery, and mayhem. Tor.com calls Bookburners brisk and hugely entertaining. Its breakneck pace never feels rushed, and its balance between the horrifyingly demonic and the hilariously clever never falters. And Publishers Weekly writes that it's as much fun as binge-watching a full season of a Showtime series. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, you can join the plot with Serial Box right now. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy listeners can get a discount on the first season of any Serial Box series by going to serialbox.com and entering the promo code GEEK18. So that's SERIALBOX.com, and the code is GEEK18. The first episode of Bookburners is also available as a free podcast on the Serial Box podcast, narrated by X.E. Sands. All right, so now let's get to our panel. Okay, and so I mentioned in the intro there that Anthony taught a class on Philip K. Dick, so why don't you just tell us a little bit about that class?
It was a student-initiated course, and I actually taught it with a writer who may be familiar to some of your listeners, Alice Sola Kim.
Oh.
We're both huge Philip K. Dick fans, and I think one of the things that's worth noting, though, is that basically we handed out a few short stories, I think, at the first session, but the whole rest of the class was just focused on reading his novels because, I think with really a handful of exceptions, I think he's the novels which tended to come later in his career, I think, are much stronger than the short stories, which tend to have kind of interesting premise, but aren't necessarily great pieces of writing.
Well, a lot of the novels, he just kind of took three short stories and jammed them all together. So if you read the novels, you're getting a lot of the short stories too.
That's fair.
And so how did the class go? How do students today respond to Philip K. Dick?
Well, it pains me to admit this, but I don't think this is necessarily a reflection of students today because this was more than a decade ago now. But it was, I think, there's a sort of there's certain things that haven't dated that well. Certainly, I mean, I think the way that Dick writes about women is generally not great, and I think there's a lot of discussion about that, and I think justifiably so. And I think there are obviously novels that are, very clearly written in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so it's not like they don't feel contemporary in the sense that, that they could be written today. But at the same time, I think a lot of people still got a lot out of the books. And there certainly seemed to be enough that like we could discuss a book a week and have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, I've always kind of said that Philip K. Dick's female characters are either the hot secretary or the nagging wife, with very few exceptions.
Yeah, I think in general he has sort of a few stock types. I think the stock types that he has on the female side are a little bit more offensive. They can be deployed, effectively. Like there's sort of like the kind of tired, aggrieved everyman who he trots out in every book and every short story, and I think it works pretty well. Some of the female stereotypes that he relies on, not so great.
It's kind of interesting, actually, speaking of his novels and the comparison of his novels and short stories. I thought it was interesting, just especially watching this show, that like all of these episodes are based on short stories, which, as you might imagine, for television, that makes more sense than adapting novels. But just in terms of the overall number of Philip K. Dick adaptations, it seems like the majority of them actually have been based on his short stories. I mean, you have Blade Runner was based on a novel, and Man in the High Castle was based on a novel. But, I mean, most of the other Philip K. Dick adaptations I can think of were all actually based on his other short stories, which seems kind of interesting, especially given what Anthony's saying.
Yeah, well, Scanner Darkly is a novel.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that one.
But yeah, and I mean, he has so many things, and so many things have been adapted at this point, it's hard to think of them all off the top of your head. But I guess let's just get into this. So, John, what did you think of this new show overall?
Well, I hate to be a downer, but I mean, I was fairly disappointed overall. I enjoyed a couple of the episodes, but I would say like at least for me, at least half of them are just like I thought bad, including 3 that I thought were really, really bad and 2 that were just like pretty bad. And then of the remaining 5, there were 2 that I really liked, and then there was 1 that I thought was pretty good, and then another that was a little bit, just like kind of okay, and then 1 that was like interesting, but like had a lot of problems with execution and overall made it unenjoyable to me. So, I'm pretty mixed on it, or I mean, I guess I'm pretty negative on it overall, but the 2 that I liked, I really liked, and the stuff that it's doing well, I think it does well. Even though I didn't particularly enjoy, like I said, more than half the episodes, it wasn't that I didn't enjoy the experience of watching them. It's just that overall, my overall sort of opinion of the show of the episodes were just like not great, And although the ones that I thought were terrible that was a little bit different. Like Crazy Diamond, I was like just so confused by, and it's just like what? It's like, wait, that's the end? What? You didn't explain anything. It's just, although actually Impossible Planet also made me furious because I just didn't understand anything that happened at the end. Although that was one that I actually read the story and I was like, well, I'm glad they didn't end it the way the story ends, because the ending of the story was like totally stupid. But anyway, yeah, so that's what my overall opinion is, but I'm sure we'll talk more about details.
Yeah, well, I think, John, I'm more positive on the show than you are, but I thought the episodes were of mixed quality for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that this show, it reminded me a lot of watching the Outer Limits revival back in the 90s. It has kind of the same production value / aesthetic sort of as that one. And I think that it, doesn't measure up. And I mean, this is like, all I want to watch is I want to turn on TV and watch science fiction anthology shows all day long on every channel. So at that level, I loved that they made this, and I would happily watch another 100 episodes of it. But it is sort of mixed quality, I thought, and doesn't really, to my mind, measure up to Black Mirror and other kind of contemporary shows. But Sarah, what do you think about that?
I thought it was great. I definitely, there were a few episodes that were sort of cringeworthy, and I definitely agree that there are some faults in there. But I think I have more of a positive attitude, in part because the casting and the retelling of, like, as a female science fiction fan, it's very, very hard. You have to kind of, when you're reading Philip K. Dick, you have to kind of put a filter on and realize, okay, this is going to piss me off, and that's okay, and and just kind of, read it knowing it is what it is. It's got faults, and so being able to finally fully enjoy PKD and not have to worry about that and not have to turn that part of me off before reading it is really a pleasure. And so just, as simple as, certain stories were, just being able to see that every man being turned into an every woman isn't something that we still struggle with representation, obviously, in television and movies. And so, being able to see that was a great pleasure for me as a female, science fiction fan.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that because I watched I'm sure I've read every Philip K. Dick story, but I read them all in high school and college, so I don't remember all of them that well. So I watched these episodes and I went back and reread the stories that they're based on. And that is one thing that strikes you if you go in reverse order like that, is how all the people of color and strong female characters and even just characters with interesting names all sort of disappear. In the fiction, it's all Anderson and Smith and Jones and so on. But so Anthony, what do you think about? Do you agree with Sarah that this show kind of redeems that aspect of Philip K. Dick?
Yeah, I think that in general it seems like an updating in a number of ways, and perhaps that's the most important and valuable one is just that seeing a broader I think treating women, giving the women more interesting roles, and in general, just creating something that's more representative of, the demographics of the, 21st century America, I think is great. I think also, a lot of the technology, a lot of the conceits have been updated in fairly interesting ways. I think I will agree that one of the things that I was really surprised by was, at least I think the order, it might be different in different countries, but the first episode on Amazon in the US was, what was it called? Real Life, yeah. Which also just a very generic title. That was the one I think that was written by Ron Moore, and I thought it was like hands down the worst episode of the season, and I just thought it was like, not like
worse than
bad
Crazy
in every way,
Diamond?
but
yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with John that Crazy Diamond is worse than
Nothing's worse than Crazy Diamond.
I loved Crazy Diamond. Okay, I texted like people about how much I loved it, and they watched it, and anyway, we can get into that. Not that I have to rely on friends who I can't dial on this podcast, but I would say Crazy Diamond is actually probably my favorite. But I thought Real Life, just felt very perfunctory in every way. Like it was just kind of like, and then I thought, I would agree that most of the episodes aren't home runs. Like they feel like they've got this basic conceit and they sort of execute on them pretty well. And they sort of rely on, I think a lot of it is just sort of the performances and the sympathy that you probably have for seeing a lot of, fairly familiar faces from TV and film. But I thought like just the range of different kinds of stories as well, I really liked. So, I don't think it's an unequivocal success, but I think overall I was pretty happy with it.
Well, when you mention Crazy Diamond and Real Life, one of the things I want to talk about is how both of those episodes are based on Philip K. Dick stories, and the episodes bear basically no similarity to the story whatsoever. Maybe like the vaguest thematic similarity or something like that.
Right.
And then that sort of irritated me that it's called Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams, and then 4 of the episodes are basically original stories that aren't really based on a Philip K. Dick's work at all, except maybe in a spiritual way or something. But maybe I'm more like persnickety about that or something. But John, do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, no, so it's funny. So I hadn't read most of these stories, or I don't think I'd read any of these stories before this. But I started off thinking like, I'm going to try to read all the stories beforehand. There's only 10, but it's like, I started to read them and I wasn't really enjoying them. And it's like, I got too much other stuff to read. So I was like, I just abandoned that. But the story Real Life is theoretically based on Exhibit Piece, is one that I read. And when I read, I was like, how are they going to adapt this? Like, what? This is a pretty bad story. And in general, I feel like they're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel of Philip K. Dick material for this show, really. It's like none of these stories are like his most notable stories. Even if you look at where they were published, it's like there was one from FNSF and one from Galaxy, and then one from Amazing and one from If. And then the other ones, they're all from like magazines, like I don't even know if I've even heard those names before. So those are like hardcore pulp magazines, that like never made much of an impact. So, not to say that they couldn't publish good stories, but I mean, this isn't the cream of the crop of Philip K. Dick material, I don't think. But yeah, so, real life though, I was thinking it's like they really wanted to make something that was based on We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, but they couldn't get the rights to that. So they're like, hey, exhibit piece. If we kind of squint at it a certain way and look at it in a certain light, we could kind of tell a story along those lines. And so, yeah, but it's like, it was a very strange adaptation. In a lot of these cases, though, I kind of feel like straying farther from the source material is maybe better, just because I wasn't too impressed with most of the stories that I read. Any of the ones that I read 4 of them. But, so, I mean, the thing is, I've talked about moldy science fiction stories before, like these sort of old stories written in the 50s or whatever that just, are really hard to read as a modern reader. And I feel like all the ones that I read were like that. And these stories were all from the 50s. And I know that's going to really shock anybody who's seen the show that, oh my goodness, these stories were written in the 50s? You don't say. I mean, especially the father thing. It's like, oh, yeah, no, that was written in the 50s? Really? You're kidding me. Anyway, yeah, that's the...
Well, no, I agree with you, John, that a lot of the stories, they couldn't just adapt them the way they are because they wouldn't work in film. And a lot of that is that a lot of the Philip K. Dick stories are like nightmares. They're they have sort of nightmare logic, and film is a very literal medium, and it's just very hard to just film it and have it seem like what's going on. But just in principle, you don't have any problem with them calling the show Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams when the story, and saying this is based on this story when it really isn't at all.
Well, I mean, I'd rather they actually adapted better stories, and that could actually be feasibly adapted honestly, rather than something like Real Life, which, like you say, is basically just an original idea that has almost no relation to the story it's theoretically based on. I think that is bullshit. But and of course, I'm normally, I really want an adaptation to be faithful. It's just that, in these cases, I'm like, well, why'd they pick these stories though? I mean, it's probably because those are the ones they could get the rights to. But so I don't know. It's I kind of despair at the thought of what stories they're going to adapt in the next season. I mean, if these are the ones they pick this time.
Well, Anthony, you were making this point to me in email, right? That you said I taught a class on Philip K. Dick, and I haven't heard of most of these stories.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that John is right that, I mean, I don't have know a ton about exactly what happened behind the scenes, but this feels to me like the Philip K. Dick estate, and I know that his daughter is one of the executive producers. I get the sense that they probably said, okay, here, the novels we still want to sell for a lot of money. Here are maybe the top tier short stories, which I would say are Faith of Our Fathers and The Electric Ant, maybe a few others. I think a handful, and then here are a bunch of others that we're probably not going to be able to sell. Mm-hmm. Why don't we make a TV show?
Yeah.
And that definitely kind of, just looking at the list of stories, that's kind of how it felt. And I don't disagree that, I think a lot of these adaptations are, it's hey, read this story and come up with a story of your own that is tangentially related. I will say the one episode I would point to is Safe and Sound, which is an adaptation of this story, Foster You're Dead, mm-hmm. which has almost zero plot points in particular, but in some ways actually felt like a really interesting updating of the same idea. And so I think there's a way to do it where you can still see that kind of spiritual connection. But I think I agree that in a lot of cases, even just reading the description of the story, you're like, wow, how did they get from A to B?
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't read the story that Safe and Sound is based on, but I thought that was the best episode, so.
Well, yeah, and so the short story, it's about it's Cold War paranoia, and there's everybody in the neighborhood has a bomb shelter, and there's one kid who doesn't have one because his dad's sort of has a original thinker or something, and the kid is just obsessed with bomb shelters. And I feel like when they were putting the show together, they probably looked at that and said, "Oh, this is so dated. Who cares about bomb shelters?" But now that Trump is president, everything old is new again. I think they could have totally used that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, but speaking of just the selection of these particular stories, and further Anthony's point, it's I did a search on ISFDB, the Internet Speculative Fiction Database, and just did a rough count. And it's he published in the neighborhood of 150 stories. So, there's a lot of stories that have never been adapted. I mean, maybe someone's sitting on the rights somewhere for some of the other more notable stories, but I'm just feeling like, I don't know, like it seems very strange to me, like that they ended up with this batch.
Well, and if you look at the dates, John, it was like 100 of those stories were published between like 1952 and 1955 or something like that. Like he was writing like 100 stories in a handful of years or something.
Right. Well, because he's like a true pulp writer, right? He's trying to like live off of selling his stories, and so it's like he just had to like churn them out and send them out, and because like he can't wait for the good ones to come back, and like if the publisher doesn't buy it, so he can wait and send it somewhere else. He's got to fire it off to every publication that's in existence so that he can hope to get a couple paychecks coming in. So that's not really the best environment to produce like the top tier work, really.
Well, and I think also like Philip K. Dick kind of like the work that I think he's really remembered for, which has its own flaws, but I think really starts around like the early 60s with A Man in the High Castle, and that's really when he becomes the Philip K. Dick that is sort of beloved today. And I think a lot of the short stories, including it sounds like all these stories, come from when, again, he was just in that period where he's just churning stuff out. So in a lot of ways, I think it's not necessarily, I think if you read these stories, you'd be like, why, why is this the science fiction writer who like so many people sort of hold, dear above all others? That seems crazy.
See, Sarah, do you have any opinions on this show sticking to the stories or not sticking to the stories?
I think that, it doesn't really bother me because I feel like PKD is always going to be an inexhaustible source of story ideas, and they should, wildly vary from the original inspiration point. And I feel like, part of it is that all of us understand because we know that PKD invented a lot of what we see now as tropes. And so when we look back at the earliest, examples of those things, they don't seem very sophisticated now to us because other things have been done with that, and that ball has been passed to multiple people who have done more interesting things with it, and we're just kind of used to it. But at the time, I'm sure it was really mind-bending stuff. And so I feel like, in a sense, if I were going to adapt a PKD story, I would go as far left field as I could with it. So it doesn't really bother me, and I like to, when I think about that story about the guy in the exhibit that decides to go live in the past, I actually think that they did stick to the central point of that story, which was that, if given the choice between two realities, we are going to pick the one that we like the most. But the series version of that inverted it and said, well, instead of picking the one we like the most, we're going to pick the one we think we deserve, which is a whole, metaphysical, ontological, and which is actually extremely appropriate for I think the major themes that he wrote about during his entire career. So I think it's highly appropriate that they change a great deal, but that, if you look at the common thread between the two stories, I think it's solid.
I thought it was a really interesting idea in the adaptation, Real Life, that the idea that if you became confused about which life was actually yours, that your actual life might seem implausibly good. That you would look at your actual life and say, like, that couldn't be my life. That's too good. Everything's too good. That must be some fraudulent thing that I've dreamed up for myself or something.
Yeah.
So, okay, but so Sarah, which of these episodes did you like the best?
I really liked Autofac, and I really liked Impossible Planet. And I had a soft spot for, I'm forgetting the name of the one with the director and the general, and she basically falls in love with an alien. Yeah, Humanist. Yeah, I had a soft spot for that one just because it was kind of a pleasure to see. I love the idea, especially in all the stories that are going around right now about Me Too, and waking up every morning as a female and having to read these things. There's something very funny to me about if aliens wanted to invade Earth, all they would have to do is be really good to the women, you know? And like, there was something hilarious about that. And it's not something that you see very often, in this idea that she would be, you know, taken with this alien who treats her much better than her real husband treated her. I don't know. There was just something very entertaining about that for me. But yeah, I think that my favorite would be probably Autofac.
Well, it was funny because you see that same thing you were just talking about in the father thing a little bit too. The chicks dig the joie de vivre of alien replica husbands.
Yeah.
So John, you mentioned that there were two that you thought were good. Which were the two that you thought were good?
Yeah, so Safe and Sound and Autofac are my two favorites. So if I was like arranging this show, I would make it a 3-episode season, and I would open with Autofac, and then have the Hoodmaker in the middle, and then end with Safe and Sound. So like do like the first season Black Mirror style, very, very short season. That's how I would do it. If I had to include more, I guess I would include Real Life in there. I have that as number 4, and then I have Kill All Others as number 5, although sort of grudgingly, because like I said, I don't think it works, but at least it kind of had kind of a cool social commentary idea in there. It's just that the execution, pun intended, is so clumsy and heavy-handed that I couldn't really enjoy it overall.
Yeah, it was too heavy-handed.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted it to work, and I was like, I could see why they put it last. Like, it kind of seems like the sort of episode that might make an impact, but they just bungled it. So yeah, like I couldn't really advocate for putting that in there. And then, anyway, you were asking about what I liked, so
stay on target.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll say I have my as my top 3: Impossible Planet, The Commuter, and Autofac. How about Anthony? What do you have as your top couple picks?
Okay. So I would say my favorite was pretty significantly Crazy Diamond, which I thought was just 10. I think had very little to do with Philip K. Dick. Although you could see like because there's like especially in some of like the Martian novels, he's really interested in. I mean like he definitely has like infidelity and as like a recurring plot point, and the idea of like sort of then eventually realizing the virtues of like coming back to like the sort of boring wife. And so there's little pieces that are kind of like him, but fundamentally I liked it more just because it was just this crazy mishmash of all these different things. And it just felt like, it just didn't feel like anything I'd seen before. And I thought like all the actors were really compelling. I liked the arc of the Steve Buscemi character, where I think he's like not a completely terrible person, but he in some ways is still like not redeemed at the end. I just liked sort of how unpredictable it was. I would say Kill All Others was another one that I agree that the execution was very strange. And I think because I knew it was written and directed by Dee Reese, who made that Netflix movie Mudbound, which is much more conventionally good, I had to sort of assume on some level that it was like intentionally very like weirdly executed, which and then like I think just something about watching it is almost like the experience of like going slightly crazy yourself. So even though I don't think it's unequivocally successful again, it like really got under my skin. And then Impossible Planet and Autofac I thought were just like very enjoyable.
Well, it's interesting that you liked Crazy Diamond and Kill All Others so much, and I agree that there is a sense in which they kind of make you feel like you're going crazy, in sort of the way that a Philip K. Dick story makes you feel like you're going crazy. So I can kind of see that they're in that spirit. But could you just explain like literally what happens in Crazy Diamond?
I was going to ask the same thing, because I have no idea.
Okay. All right, because this is with spoilers, right?
Yeah.
So basically there's a man who works for a factory that makes quantum computers, which for hand wavy reasons basically are used to power like empty, like basically I'm not sure if they're like humans who've gone catatonic or just like biological robotic shells, but these things called Jack and Jills. He meets a woman who is a Jill whose quantum computer is failing her, so she needs to steal another one. And so like she sort of enlists him in this scheme to try to steal a bunch of them, one of which she will steal for herself. But then the handoff goes badly because basically like the people she's selling it to did not, like, they decided to just keep it for themselves. She re-enlists him to try to, like, get revenge, and they sort of successfully, hook her up to another quantum computer, kill all the people who were their enemies. I think she was working with, okay, it's a really complicated plot. She was working with his boss, who then gets killed as well. I think that, and then so there are a couple key moments where I think he kind of backs down. One is, which is not made a big deal out of, one is he pulls the alarm when at the last minute when they're doing the initial heist. The second time, he doesn't defend her. Like, he's basically taking the quantum essence out, or seems semi-willing to take the quantum essence out of her when threatened by his boss. So she eventually decides to leave him behind. And so then she goes to his long-suffering wife and says, why don't we, like, take this boat together and ditch this guy?
Okay.
So what's with the pig people?
Oh,
why
I don't know. I just like that part. But there's no explanation. And there's this whole discussion around, like, percentage of normality, which didn't... It was never explained, but that to me felt like the whole setting was so strange and unexplained that I didn't mind that there were large pieces of the world building that weren't explained.
Why were they living at the edge of a cliff, and why couldn't they dig in the dirt?
I think it was because basically, so there's some sort of, like, corporation that wants to turn them into, like, these, like, docile consumers, and so like selling them all this food that's expiring very quickly, and has put something under the ground that basically means that after a certain point you hit whatever plate or whatever they've put into the ground.
Okay, wait, Sarah, you say it's a metaphor?
I honestly think a lot of those things were kind of meant to give us that sense of everything in this world is decaying and dying, and that adds to the part of Steve Buscemi's sort of anxiety and fatigue about the whole thing, and why he is, attracted to, doing something different. And so I feel like all of those things were meant to be kind of visual metaphors of what this world is like. To me, the only thing that bothered me that was unexplained was the little girl in the woods. Like, where did she come from? Like, she doesn't seem like she belongs with the other gypsies, because she's kind of, she's in this immaculate white dress. She's not wearing rags patched together and everything. So you have no idea where she came from or what her purpose is. I liked it that she kind of, snuck in and put the gun in the Jill's hand at the last minute. That was cool. But I just was like, where did she come from? But I mean, overall, the episode, though, was so... I liked that it was campy. Like, that's the one thing I did like about it. It felt like a 90s music video, where they were just trying to put random weird imagery, as much as possible in there. And it had that sense like this is going to be on, or could have been on, an episode of MST3K.
Okay, well, so wait. So what Anthony was saying was interesting, that this is basically a satire of consumerism, where the whole society is constructed in such a way that you have to keep buying things, even up to your house, which they purposely situate at the edge of a cliff so that they are constantly falling into the sea and you have to keep buying new houses. Is that what you're saying, Anthony?
Yeah, although I would say that, part of what I liked about it was that it is a satire of consumerism in part, and then it is many other things kind of all mashed together, which I think is also part of... this sounds like such a cop-out, but I think in some ways is a very, Dickian kind of thing to do, is that there's one aspect which is consumer satire, and then there are other interests as well.
I sort of admired this episode in the sense that it was sort of original, and it had an artistic vision, and it was doing its own thing. I just found the weirdness just overwhelming and sort of grating, but I could understand people liking it. And
I guess the one other thing I'd want to say about the world building, and I think that's interesting about the contrast, is something like Crazy Diamond, where there's so many different ideas. I think, like, I'm willing to accept that certain things don't necessarily seem to make sense, versus an episode like Real Life, where I think it feels much more, grounded in a lot of ways, and as if trying to be like a realistic extrapolation of certain ideas and technologies. The fact then that, like, the fundamental idea of this VR world that you can get trapped in by destroying the VR device in that world seems to me so... I don't know that it's actually more implausible than anything in Crazy Diamond, but it kind of stands out because the tone of the two episodes is so different. Whereas with Crazy Diamond, I'm like, pig person, sure, I'll go with it.
Well, okay, I'll agree with you that I thought that the aesthetic of real life was just Blade Runner, and the aesthetic of
Cheap Blade Runner.
of the Hoodmaker was just Minority Report. And, yeah, like cheap Minority Report. I mean, and so like I'll grant you that you know, an episode like Crazy Diamond had more going for it. And it kind of made me sad, actually, going back and reading some of these stories that they didn't do some of the more weird things. Like in one of the stories, in Foster You're Dead, they have the furniture is like AI animals, and it's constantly running around and handing you stuff and taking dishes away and things like that. And as long as you're doing that story, I thought they should have stuck that in there somewhere. I thought that was kind of interesting and new. But yeah, so I guess if we're going to talk about the consumer satire, I guess we want to talk about Autofac, which, as I said, is one of my favorite of these stories. So, John, you liked Autofac, right?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. You know, I felt like this, even though this is one of my favorites, I mean, I thought like it was too long. Like, I mean, it could have, although I think every episode basically could have lost a few minutes in editing. Even Safe and Sound, which was my favorite, it definitely should have lost the last 5 minutes where we didn't need the explanation of that, of everything that happened. But in Autofac, it was just like a little bit slow. There was a bunch of stuff that was extraneous, but the overall episode I really enjoyed. I really liked seeing the factory. It almost could have been a crossover with Metalhead from Black Mirror. But and it's kind of funny that this was on Amazon because like Jeff Bezos probably really liked that whole Autofac thing. Seeing that in action. And it was
no, but he would have made it the hero of the story, right?
Yeah, right. True. And then it was kind of great that an issue of Wired plays a pivotal plot point. So it's kind of perfect for us to talk about it on this podcast. But.
Well, and tell me what you think, John. I thought that the premise of Autofac, granted that it was from the 50s, was interesting enough and fresh enough to be, you know, interesting in 2018. You know, this idea of they've set up these automated factories delivering goods by drone, and they can't shut it off, and you're getting all these like crocs and stuff, all this useless crap you don't need. And it's consuming all the natural resources in a way that's actually threatening human survival. I thought that was a great premise. I thought it was very, speaking of metaphors, I thought it had a lot of obviously metaphorical resonance. And I don't know if you saw, I didn't actually get a chance to read it, but there was this piece recently by Ted Chiang where he was saying that, just from the blurb I read, he was saying basically that people are so afraid of evil AIs conquering humanity and enslaving us and stuff like that, but that we basically have corporations that are basically evil AIs that have conquered us already, and why don't we have the same level of fear about that as we do about, you know, the literal AI machines? And I thought that this story kind of did a nice job of literalizing that that metaphor.
Yeah, I agree, and I totally agree about the whole premise, like feeling very fresh. Like as I was watching it, I was actually thinking like, oh, I mean, I could actually see reprinting this story today. Like, I mean, if the story is like, if the actual story is like the episode, and I see from your comments that it's a similar premise, but not necessarily super similar maybe, but I mean, I have to read it for sure, but I mean, just like if this episode was, you know, just written as a story, like I would have been like, yeah, you know, that totally feels like a contemporary story to me. So that was very cool. And I love the idea as a person who has spent a lot of time studying post-apocalyptic fiction. I thought it was a really interesting sort of thing to have to deal with in an apocalypse, and it totally made sense. Like I bought it and I really liked it. Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons it was one of my favorites. But and I gather in the story they don't end up being robots. So it's like how does it resolve in there?
So in the story, they get the different factories to fight each other over resources and destroy each other.
That's pretty cool too. I mean, does it work pretty well in the story? Is that like one of the better stories, or?
I think the story's way too long for the idea.
Oh, okay.
Oh, interesting, because I would say that I think that's true that the story is too long overall, though I think the ending is kind of rushed because then the resolution comes very quickly.
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend reprinting it in its current form, but I really like the premise. Let's see, Sarah, what did you think of Autofac?
I loved it. It was one of my favorites as well. I thought it was great, and I really loved the central female character. Again, you know, taking the sort of Philip K. Dick character and having it just be female, and with everything that
Mm-hmm.
comes with it. And she was also a very plausible character. Like you can kind of imagine her, being one of these sort of, titans of Silicon Valley, brilliant, and somebody basing an AI after her. And so I think that, the whole thing in terms of character development was really wonderful, which is something that is missing from most PKD I've ever read. Like, I don't think that you read PKD for character development. I don't think you read it for, beautiful turns of phrase. You read it for the ideas, and that is the strongest thing that has ever come out of PKD. And I think that's also why he's an inexhaustible resource, for adaptation. But yeah, I loved this story.
Well, there were some sexy times in this episode and in Human Is that stick out in my mind that are not, I don't particularly remember any sex scenes in any Philip K. Dick stories offhand.
Yeah, I think we know why Bryan Cranston chose to star in that one. Human Is. Because he's one of the executive producers, and I gather he's one of the main forces behind the show being made. So just kind of funny. It's like, because otherwise, why would you pick that episode? Like, really? Like, of all these episodes, that's the one you want to be in? It's like, oh, I know why.
Well, but then I think he also gets to do this transformation between being like the sort of like monstrous husband to the kind ones that may be interesting from an actorly perspective.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that, Anthony? Are there any sex scenes in Philip K. Dick stories?
There are a few. They tend to be very, I think again, like in the 50s, you had to be very discreet about it. I think when you move into the 60s, he tends to be a bit more open about sex, and you also start to get a sense of like the kind of woman that he's interested in, which is basically Rachel in Blade Runner. And he there are sex scenes, but they're very, and then they clasped each other. And then a few minutes later, he asked her something.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's interesting. Like, obviously back in the day, like you couldn't be as free with it as you can now. But I mean, like Heinlein had lots of like, sort of unusual type of, at least alluded to certain types of unusual types of sex things in his stories, like polyamory and stuff, like way before that was, accepted at all. And I don't mean to say, any of that's weird or anything. It was just that, it was beyond the norm at the time. And he was one of the first writers to sort of, have that kind of stuff in his fiction. And so it's like, and Dick was writing at the same time. So, I mean, he certainly could have, he chose not to, which is fine. I mean, but it did seem weird to me, though, I think was what you're getting at, right, Dave, is that they inserted these like, pretty vivid sex scenes into this Philip K. Dick show.
Yeah. And they felt out of place, and I mean, I not that I don't care particularly, but I did feel like I couldn't help thinking when they came on, I was like, oh, they're doing this to goose the ratings for, this is a TV show and they got to put it in, like, and not that it was particularly graphic or exploitative or anything like that, but it did feel like, oh, we've got the 1950s science fiction story, and now like here's the sex scene sort of stuck into it.
Right. Well, and given I felt like every episode could have been trimmed a little bit, like, I mean, in those two, in all the sex scenes, like, okay, well, if you could have just cut away from that would have saved us a minute or 30 seconds or something at least, and like, okay, let's keep cutting, folks. But
although I did kind of think it was interesting in Human Is, where the wife goes down to the sex club in the lower levels, and you like just kind of like have an orgy inside a giant bubble of air, and that's like an erotic experience in this environment, because air is such a luxury.
I bet that wasn't in the story.
No, definitely.
Yeah, I think there was a New York Times critic that griped about that scene in particular and said it was, something like it was the most random scene, but to me it was so central to the character development of this woman that obviously she's extremely unsatisfied by what she's getting at home. So and frankly, in terms of the whether or not the scenes should be there, I will always be in favor of sex scenes that are not overtly phallocentric, because that's what you see 90% of the time. So I think that is also part of their very clear desire to directly challenge a lot of the things that we associate with PKD.
Before we move too far off AutoFac, I'll say, although I really like that episode, I feel like one of the things that happened in that one, in the sense that the resolution ends up with the people turning out to be androids. It's like that felt like a very sort of modern day revision of Philip K. Dick. Like if it's like somebody who knew Philip K. Dick's work, or at least knew it from Blade Runner. When they wrote this story, they're like, oh hey, like what if we took it in a very Dickian direction, more so than what the original story had. And that's one of the things that I actually think is kind of hampering the overall 10 episodes, is that a lot of the things end in this sort of predictably Dickian way. To the extent that Dick can be predictable at all, but there's just like a lot of things where it's like okay, yeah, it's like if you know anything about Philip K. Dick's work, it's like okay, yeah, that seems pretty obvious that that's where that's going, you know. So that's one of the things that I felt like it kind of got to be a bit repetitive, knowing that it's like okay, well these are all Philip K. Dick shows, so I kind of know where this is going to go.
I have to say though, John, like watching Autofac, I didn't see that coming, and everything you say is completely true, and it made perfect sense within the context of that world, and it was, there were clues and everything, but it was a nice surprise to me. So, however obvious... Go ahead.
And I don't object to it in that particular episode, but I'm just saying, like, it's sort of emblematic of that particular issue. And I think that was actually a smart move in that decision, in that choice. Although I do kind of love the idea of them turning the autofacs on each other. That sounds pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, it worked here.
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned, so I have Impossible Planet as my favorite of these episodes, and I agree with you. I think, John, you said that the ending was just kind of like, what? And I agree that I wish it were a little bit less just purely magical what happens at the end. Mm-hmm. I guess I'll just say, so the premise of this episode is that there's a spaceship and they're hired to take a very elderly woman, she's like 350 years old or something, to Earth, even though Earth no longer exists. And they're going to pull a scam on her where they're just going to take her to some vaguely Earth-like planet and take her money. And then it turns out that somehow magically the main character and this elderly woman are transported back to Earth when it still existed and there was pretty swimming holes and stuff like that. And I just the whole thing I found just worked for me really emotionally really well. Mm-hmm. And I wish there'd been a little bit more like of a sci-fi hand-wavy bullshit kind of stuff at the end, so that it wasn't just pure magic. But overall, I found it a very enjoyable episode. I think, Sarah, you said you liked this one?
Yeah, and for a lot of, I feel like a lot of PKD stories do this, in part because of maybe his background in theology. And, I think even though he's considered hard sci-fi, a lot of his stuff isn't necessarily what we think of as science fiction, because science fiction likes to invent explanations for incredible things, impossible things. It's a very different approach, and it's very much more artistic, and much more philosophical, to just present the idea that the world that you know is not necessarily correct and not necessarily true, and to not explain things, to just have impossible things happen and not explain it. So even though as a viewer, you want to understand how that scene happened, you want to understand how the characters got to that point, anything, some explanation, because it's really effective and it's really beautiful. But I do think that it is a common thing you see a lot in PKD, is there is no explanation. It just is.
Maybe this is dumb, but I just wish for me there had been some Star Trek kind of thing where they're like, I'm reading an anomaly, I can't explain it. Like, I think just something like that would have been enough for me.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the other aspect of it is because on some level, especially given the name of the episode and the story, is you're like, okay, in some way, they're going to end up on Earth, right? So the question is not, are they going to end up on Earth, is what is the sort of, the mechanism that's going to allow them to get there? And then you sort of it turns out, it just basically, we decided. And it's still like well done, but I think that's part of why it's unsatisfying, is because the episode is structured in a way where you think there's going to be some sort of like clever explanation, and that's just dodged completely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I didn't like it, I think. Because I was enjoying it up until the ending. And then, like when the episode when the credits started, when the credits first popped up, I was just like, really, I literally threw up my hands and I was like, that's it? That's the end? Like, what the hell? Like, what? We don't get any explanation for that. Like, if it had happened, if everything had happened like it does, like, I probably would have been happier with it if the guy on the ship doesn't look exactly like her fucking grandfather or whatever it was, or whoever that guy was that she had in the picture. It's like, or was it her old husband or whoever it was? But I was like, why does he look exactly like the guy? Like, I don't understand. Like, at least if they got onto the planet and then he just sort of ended up in that role or something, I could have bought it, because it's like, oh, well, maybe they're hallucinating or something. Like, maybe there's some kind of weird thing in the air or whatever, and that's not really what's on the planet. They're actually dying, and they're just having this hallucination that they're in this paradise of Earth. Like, that at least I could have understood, but like what we got, I just didn't understand at all. I'm like, what happened?
Well,
like,
wait, isn't John the implication that they've traveled back in time and he's become her grandfather? That's what I got out of it.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes me like it even less, but okay.
Well,
I think you can interpret it, because like there's also like the way they sort of tilt, because you never actually see what happened. Like, there's no independent confirmation from back on the ship that they've disappeared or anything like that. And then like the camera kind of tilts up and you get this sort of ominous music before they cut to credits. So I think it's meant to be that they could have traveled back in time. It could be just some sort of magical version of Earth that still exists, or it could be a delusion that they're suffering as they die. I mean, I think all of those things are...
But if it's a magical version of Earth that still exists, why does he look like her grandfather or whatever?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think there's a good explanation.
Okay.
Well, I mean, a lot of them have unexplained endings. I mean, the Hoodmaker also has absolutely no idea whether or not she, let the guy burn to death. So...
Wait,
that was a tall cop-out.
Wait, let me just stick with the possible planet for a second, because I don't think that he should have been her grandfather, if I'm understanding it right, because then you get into like the weird genetic stuff, and I hate that trope if people become their own grandparent or whatever. But if she just had a picture of her grandfather and he was standing in the background somewhere, and she's like, when I saw you, I knew that's you. And he's like, no, that's not me. It's like a fuzzy photo, whatever. She's like, no, I know that's you. And so she has at least some reason to believe, to like, no matter what the evidence is, no matter what is happening, I believe that that you're gonna end up back on Earth, and I want to go with you because I have this photograph. And it seems like, sort of like a foolish hope, but like from her point of view, it sort of makes a kind of sense, and we can sort of see like why she would be so driven to do this in the face of all this evidence to the contrary. So that's what I think it should have been.
Right.
I guess like part of it is like it can't be. I think something about the ending is like fundamentally not gonna is gonna resist like a rational explanation, because the fact that they go out and that they choose to stay out, and that he specifically decides to go out and stay out and choose to like basically presumably die out there, is this sort of either insane and I don't know he's succumbing to this kind of madness, or it's this almost sort of mystical decision. So like, I think the grandfather stuff in some ways is meant to get us there. I agree that it doesn't quite work for me, but I think that's part of what it's there for, is that there's this sort of there's this magical component to the ending.
I just want an anomaly. Is that so much to ask for?
Yeah. I mean, I think an anomaly would have made the medicine go down easier, but so what's the deal with the robot? Like, the robot gets his angry eyes twice, but then he doesn't do anything to save the woman. He knows she's going down to this planet he thinks she's going down to this planet that's gonna kill her, but then he just lets her go do it. I mean, like, unless the robot's in on it, he knows what's happening. He knows that it's going to be safe. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand the robot. Like, why did his robot eyes get red and menacing? He didn't do anything.
I think the robot eyes got red for false suspense. I mean, I think the reason he allows it to happen is because it's also established that she's going to die soon. So I think it's fair to say that, well, he just wants her to like believe in this illusion and to get some happiness before she dies. Yeah. So I think that's why he doesn't object.
I mean, I get that he would do that and that he would make those decisions, but I don't understand why he's given the red eyes. Like, it's like...
Yeah, I mean, I think that was dumb.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway.
I just have to... other than... I agree with the red eyes, but otherwise, I really liked that robot character, and I really liked just the dynamic of the robot butler leading the very elderly woman around, and she's kind of... losing her faculties somewhat, and he's super capable because intellectually because he's a robot and is kind of taking care of her. And I just thought that was really interesting characters. And like Sarah's saying, like they're the kind of characters that you don't see actually in actual Philip K. Dick stories so much because they don't tend to have interesting female characters. Whereas I thought this was a legitimately interesting female character in this story.
Yeah. I agree, and I really like the robot also. Yeah, and it's like I was saying the ending of this, even though it doesn't make any sense to me, it's like it's better than the story ending, which it's like they take her down to the planet or whatever, and like the guy comes back to the ship and like he has a quarter in his pocket, and he's like, oh, like what's this thing? And like he sees it's a quarter, and it's like, and then that's the end. It's like, oh, it really was Earth. It's like, oh my god. Like it's like, I mean, I know the story was written in the 50s, but come on.
Okay, well, so wait, let's move on to another story, because I want to talk about The Commuter, which I have as one of my favorites, and I don't think people have particularly mentioned, but, and this is another one, like, as much as I liked it, I needed an explanation, sort of like I did with, the Crazy Diamond one. But I guess I'll just throw that out there. Can anyone explain this story to me?
No.
It sounds like no. Okay, so the setup basically is that there's a railroad employee and a woman starts coming to his ticket window to buy tickets to a train stop that does not exist. And he eventually tracks his way to this train stop and finds it a sort of like perfect place, a perfect town where everything's awesome. But then when he comes home, his son, who is very troubled and is a constant source of grief for this guy and his wife, has vanished from their lives as if he had never existed. And then he goes back to the town and confronts the woman who is buying tickets from him, who it seems like kind of runs the town, and everyone there, it's not perfect, but they're all kind of trapped there or something. And they all have dark secrets that maybe they got rid of by coming to the town or tried to escape by coming to the town. And he eventually gets his son back. And again, like emotionally, this worked really well for me. And I thought the main character was really interesting character. He just had an interesting face and interesting expressions and things, and seems like someone you would meet in real life. What?
Sorry, he's the actor who played Wormtail in the Harry Potter series.
But yeah, I feel like I need to watch this again, and even if I do, I'm not sure it'll ever actually make sense. But I like enough of the pieces were there that it kind of worked for me overall. But I don't know. Does anyone? So I guess no one can really explain particularly what was going on in this episode. No,
I mean your explanation goes as far as my understanding does.
Yeah, like it's you have to, I think, sort of think about them in reverse, right? So like in the end, you kind of realize, okay, so the whole thing is about whether or not, if you have the choice, do you accept the version of reality that is kinder and happier, but feels a little bit empty in terms of authenticity, or do you accept the authentic life that is probably going to be full of pain and suffering? And so if you accept that that is the point, then you can kind of go backward through the story, and it makes a lot more sense.
Interesting.
I mean, I kind of like the idea of this like weird little secret town and everything. Like, and that does seem like a very 50s idea that, it's like, oh, there's a stop in between these two stops on the train or whatever. Like, but I like the kind of idea of finding this little magical town like that. Yeah, I don't know. I wish it made more sense. Like I didn't understand what was happening with the son and everything, why he had disappeared and all that kind of thing. And it's like hearing you explain it, like, kind of makes it make more sense to me. But like, I feel like there's not enough of it there to grab hold of as a viewer. Although also I also thought that like, why did they pick a boring ass title like The Commuter? I mean, I know that's what the story was called, but it should have been called like The Last Train to Macon Heights or something. It's like, at least that's like a distinct title that actually is like basically like what the story, like, tells you what the story is. I mean,
but The Commuter is sort of, it's like the perfect reference when you're saying the everyman, right? Which is classic PKD. So it's like,
I mean, I guess
it could be any train conductor.
I don't know. I have a distaste for like these really these really conventional sort of just like titles that could apply to like.
Well, I mean, as we're recording this, there's a movie called The Commuter with Liam Neeson that just came out.
That's true. That's right. I forgot about that. I also hated that title. But just speaking of other actors, we're talking about the main actor in this episode, but also Tuppence Pendleton is in it, who plays Riley in Sense8. So it was nice to see her getting other work.
I want to say, like, I did read the story for this, and it has actually kind of an interesting explanation, which is not in the show, and I don't think is really consistent with the show. But in the story, this town failed to come into existence by one vote, which I think that is in the TV show. But because of this, it sort of existed in a sort of like Schrodinger's cat kind of way, where it's sort of there and sort of not, and it's gradually firming up its existence. And as it does, things outside the town have to change to conform with the existence that the town is forming into. So, like, if there's somebody who lives in the town and who commutes into the city, then the place that they commute to, the city has to change to create the place that they commute to, so that things remain consistent. And so that's why things change when he comes back. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, but it sheds really no light on the TV episode particularly.
Mm.
All right, cool. How about any? So let's see. We talked about that. The other Hoodmaker I have is number 4. How do people feel about? See, Sarah, did you just say something about Hoodmaker?
Just that it's another one that you're not quite sure what happens at the end, and they leave it, ambiguous on purpose. And I feel like in general, in terms of science fiction, whether or not science fiction has a responsibility to explain or not, I tend to err on the side of not, because I feel like when the creators of science fiction have this, sense of, oh, we better explain this for people, then it tends to be bad explanations. Like, it always tends to be something like the midichlorians. And so I feel like maybe I've just been traumatized by too many poor explanations, but I prefer things, if given the choice, that are left a little bit unexplained.
Well, like all the telepaths having facial markings.
Yeah, that was cool.
Was there any explanation for that?
I don't think so.
That was even applied or anything? Yeah.
No. No, but I when Sarah was talking about the right at the end here, yeah, I was saying I felt like a cop out to me to sort of just like end the episode where it did. Like, it's like as much as I feel like every episode could have been shortened, including this one, I thought like at least the ending of this one, just give us 2 more minutes to actually just show us like what happens right at the end. It's like, I don't understand cutting away before they show us the decision. It didn't feel like one of those stories that like warrants that. It's not like Inception, where it's like, no, Inception has to end that way. Don't fucking explain that. It's like, but like with this, it didn't feel like that. So I don't understand why they cut it there.
Anthony,
yeah, I don't know that I can defend it on dramatic grounds, but I did just find it sort of partly because I thought like that scene, the scene before had sort of gone on for too long, where she's sort of agonizing at the door. And so just like then when you realize, oh, they're not going to resolve this and it's just going to end in this sort of this moment of uncertainty, to me, that was just like fun, like not fun isn't the right word, but just like sort of pleasurable. Like, when you realize that like the story isn't going to answer the question and it's just going to leave you with the question. Sometimes like that can be like really pleasurable as well. And I enjoyed that. So I guess I was sort of on.
But see, so I felt like it was clear that she was not going to let him through the door, that she was going to let him burn to death. And that's why it pans away to the burning city in that last shot, because what's happened is that the telepathic people and the non-telepathic people are now in open warfare with each other. And their relationship is, a microcosm of that. And it's just the tragedy of people with different, people from different backgrounds or whatever, not being able to bridge those differences. Because the ending totally doesn't work. Like, if they were to extend it 2 minutes, John, and then she's like, okay, actually, I love you. Here, I'll open the door. Let's run away together. I mean, it doesn't work with anything else that happened in the episode, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, the other thing is that, though, if they wanted, I think, a degree of because, like, if they'd had her, I think if they wanted to really say, like, he's left there, like, then they would have shown her walking away. So to, like, still have it in that moment, and with him still alive and still begging, I think is meant to at least create. I agree that, like, that your explanation seems more plausible, and the more likely ending. But I think, I think they ended it where they did, partly because they did want to leave a little bit of uncertainty there.
Mm. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to see her walk away and like let him burn to death. I wanted to see him burn to death.
Yeah, that guy, he just can't catch a break. Richard Madden, man.
Although I will say, like, I mean, that's like why, like, Crazy Diamond is like, it recognizes that a man can be shitty, but he doesn't necessarily deserve to die a horrible death. Just throw him off the boat. Throw them off the
That's
boat.
right.
You don't have to burn them to death. Just throw them off the boat.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I did like Hoodmaker, and it was actually the first one I saw because, because I think Anthony mentioned earlier how in the UK they aired these in different order, and so the Wikipedia page actually has them listed in the UK order. So I thought Hoodmaker was actually the first episode, and so obviously on Amazon I saw that it wasn't, but I was trying to read the stories first, and so I read Hoodmaker first because I thought it was the first episode. But then when I sat down to watch TV, I was like, oh man, Hoodmaker isn't first. So I ended up watching them out of order a little bit, which bothers me as an anthologist, because as an anthologist, you agonize over the order that you put the stories in the book, and your ideal reader will read it in the order that you agonized putting the stories in, instead of skipping around like an asshole. But so I skipped around like an asshole, unfortunately.
Well, let me say about that story, though. I thought that it had one really interesting idea, which is that in the episode, the mobs are attacking the Teeps because they don't want their minds read. And in the story, the mobs are attacking the people who are wearing the hoods because they're like, what do you if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have any problem taking your hood off. So you must be a horrible person. So we're going to rip your hood off and find out what your secrets are. And I thought that was a much more, I mean, I understand why they had to do it for the TV show because they had this war between the Teeps and the humans and so on. But I thought that was a really more interesting idea and more sort of psychologically interesting and relevant to the current, political environment. And so I wish they could have done something with that.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I think it was harder to sell the idea that, that was in the PKD story, that these empaths are here to hurt you, whereas in his time, it was a paranoia about mind reading and about, government interference and Cold War fears and all of that. And with us in our society, we understand, well, wait a minute, if there's a group of people who can read minds, surely that group would be persecuted. And what would that mean? So I feel like, the series version sort of adjusted for the realities of social justice.
Well, and I think it also has these interesting dynamics because the telepaths are being persecuted, but at the same time, to the extent that the government wants to use them, it's not for particular. I mean that they are essentially using it to spy on people, and so I think that some of the fears that people have seem legitimate in the context of the story and why someone would want to put on a hood. So it seems like a story that lives in that area where none of the different sides of it you're meant to wholeheartedly endorse.
Yeah, you empathize with both sides of it, which I think is the one thing that they did really nicely in this episode.
What did you guys think of there's also this thing where basically one of the telepaths is a sex worker, and the way she does it is she's basically living through this horrific sexual fantasy of this terrible politician. Yeah,
that was horrifying.
Yeah, I meant to mention that, actually. I thought that was really, really interesting. And I don't think I've ever seen that before. But so basically, yeah, this telepath is a sex worker, and basically her clients come in and force her to read their minds as they fantasize the most horrible, dominating, violent things they can about what they want to do to her. And I don't remember ever seeing that in science fiction before that I can think of. And I thought that was a really, really interesting idea.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of what's that Cameron movie? Strange
Strange Days.
Strange Days. Yeah, so Strange Days. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that reminded me of Strange Days because of the way, the guy has the rig that transmits the emotions or whatever, and then he assaults that woman, and so it's or did they just have sex willingly? I can't even remember, but I remember it's there was that cross-linking between the sex partners that reminded me of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have not talked about Safe and Sound, which, John, you said that's your favorite, right?
Right. So did anybody else not? Did everybody else not like it?
I liked it. I would say it was I would say not one of my favorites, but very solid.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have it number 5, so I liked it pretty well.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, why don't you talk, John, about why this was your favorite?
Right. Yeah. No. I thought it was a really believable, creepy dystopian future, and I thought it did a really good job at depicting the technology. Again, it kind of felt like it could have been an episode of Black Mirror. which
Yeah,
kind of makes
totally.
me predisposed towards liking it. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think we needed the recap in the last 5 minutes. I mean, it was totally clear what happened. It's like, we get it. She loved Big Brother. Give us a little fucking credit. But and although, like, in this episode, which I thought was rare amongst these 10, I felt like that was the only 5 minutes that needed to be cut, really, from that episode. Like, I was pretty happy with it otherwise. I mean, maybe I would have tried to trim it something else down, but I mean, like, that was the only thing that jumped out at me, is like, okay, that was absolutely unnecessary, but the rest of the episode I really thought was well done. I thought the actress did a really good job, who I don't think I've ever seen before. I really liked everything about it. I thought everything looked really good, and I bought it all happening. I mean, it's kind of it's a little obvious. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty clear what's going on fairly early on. I don't know if it's supposed to be a huge surprise. Based on the fact that they felt the need to explain it at the end, I feel like they didn't think we were going to get it, but I enjoyed it anyway.
Well, yeah, let's just say, so the premise of this is that there's a futuristic society where everyone wears these kind of bracelets that are kind of like your iPhone, and they're tracking your movement, they're recording everything you do and transmitting it to the government. And there's a girl who was raised in a settlement outside of the society, and her mother's an activist against it. And they come to the city together, and this teenage girl has to go to high school with these kids who wear these bracelets, and she's kind of the, like, fish out of water, and has to sort of navigate high school with this weird technology too. I agree with you, John. The actress I thought was just fantastic. And I guess the reason I have this number 5 is because I thought that her transition to taking a bomb into school needed a lot more justification than it got in this episode. I don't know what the time frame was supposed to be, but it seems like she was only in school for like a couple of weeks or something. And I think maybe they should have had like little title cards saying like, fall, winter, spring, summer or something, so that, her brainwashing was happening over some more plausible span of time.
I can't disagree. That would have made it better.
Well, and that it also, like, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, I mean, it's just that it was obviously such that as soon as, like, he's like, you got to make a bomb, you probably have been, like, there have been a lot of warning signals already, but at that point, you know that this is obviously a terrible idea. And even if you understand why she might think it's a good idea, like, or that she needs to do it because he's, like, succeeded in isolating her in all these different ways, like, there's still, like, because you know it's a bad idea, I think it sort of creates this separation from her versus, like, if they kind of done something where the viewer was also tricked and in further into the story, and that whole thing had been a little bit more plausible, I think the ending would have been more effective for me.
Right, because the way I remember it anyway, it seems like she's going into school to set off the bomb. Was that what it was? Or because it seems like it would make more sense if it was a sting operation and she was going to pass the bomb to the kid who wronged her or whatever, and that's what she thought she was doing.
I thought she thought it was a bomb, or they made it like it was going to be a bomb, but I thought she thought that it was inert or something. Did she think it was a real bomb? I can't remember now.
I think the line is, "We would never let you, actually harm anyone."
Yeah.
But, like, that doesn't mean it's not a real bomb, just that, like, that they're saying we will definitely catch you before then. But then it doesn't seem clear, well, why then is this... I think the explanation is that that this terrorist cell is supposedly going to force her to set off a bomb anyway, so she might as well just go set off the bomb to, like, root them out. But, like, that seems so convoluted and obviously bad.
Yeah, so the ending needed some work, I thought. Were you going to say something else, Sarah?
Just that I feel like it wouldn't have worked with an older character. I think a lot of the decisions that they made because she was clearly young, clearly naive, and I think part of that is that, you as you're going through watching, it's very clear what is going to happen from the beginning, almost too clear, to the point where I feel like it had to have been intentional. And so instead of it being a surprise, it's like this sense of foreboding, because you're watching this girl who's very naive go through this whole experience, and the whole time you're just kind of cringing for her, and so I feel like that, that building sense of foreboding into what has happened. If anything, it surprised me that she didn't, just as a viewer, it would have been nice if she had actually figured it out right before she actually did it and said, well, wait, no. And And so it was painful to watch her just go through with it when you knew what was going to happen from the beginning. And that, I think, is also another reason why the ending was too drawn out. We didn't need to see, like, once we realized, okay, she had been tricked, to see the sort of denouement happen. You're like, oh, I don't want to watch any more of this.
Well, and I'll say, I thought the actress was great. And I also thought the guy who was the voice on the phone was fantastic. And just, I mean, like they seem to have such chemistry at the beginning, and then how he goes from nice to scary, I just thought was really, really effective.
Yeah, totally agree. And one of the other things I really loved about it was that just the whole that made it feel so contemporary to me was this whole notion of the government sort of basically encouraging these or faking these terrorist attacks in order to keep the people scared so that they can enact their policies as they want, as they enact their preferred policies based on this fear that isn't actually real, like, stoking these fears in order to pass certain things that people wouldn't agree to otherwise, getting people to give up certain freedoms and all that kind of stuff. So, I felt a lot of synergy with contemporary culture there. And, I mean, so.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I wondered about also was, like, I think at the beginning, the episode, it's partly because the mother character, played I think by Mara Tierney, is so confrontational and in some ways such a caricature of this sort of anti-technology like hippie, that I thought it was going to be more about like contrasting life in the bubble and life in the city and sort of like what are like the positives and minuses of like giving up this kind of networked surveillance society. And instead it just became this is all this technology is bad. It's bad. And like, I think it was effective in that way. And I think in some ways maybe makes a more, a sharper sort of satirical point. But I did feel a little bit of disappointment that maybe the slightly more kind of ambiguous, nuanced story that I thought it was going in didn't really end up happening. Yeah,
well, I agree with that. I said the exact same thing in our Black Mirror panel about Archangel, which was a very similar sort of premise. And it was the same thing, there's like, oh, this technology is awful. And I started out this one where there's, the disagreement between the girl and her mother. And I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be like what I wanted Archangel to be. It's going to be more of the pluses and minuses of, surveillance, like security versus freedom and so on. And then it's like, no, it's just, and now she's, now she's building a bomb, oh, well.
Yeah, I thought they did a really great job of just like of that depiction of that technology, though. Like it looks so believable. I really love when television and movies are able to do something like that. And it's kind of interesting. It felt very Philip K. Dickian, also, just because like in like Minority Report, it has really great depictions of that kind of futuristic technology. And then, of course, Blade Runner has its depictions and everything. I mean, I think Minority Report does a better job of like doing something that looks very, very, very futuristic, but believable. But, and so, Safe and Sound does this as well. So, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, but I feel, I mean, Anthony, you can tell me what you think about this, but I feel like that the Hollywood people deserve the credit for that, not Philip K. Dick. I mean, like.
Oh, totally.
Like in one of the, what was the story, where he's like commuting to Ganymede, and it's just like literally there's the highway and he's got his like car, and there's no no effort to, it's just like just like slapping science fiction labels on 1950s everyday life.
Yeah, I don't remember which one that is, but I think that's definitely something that he's very like guilty of in general. I mean, that like I think he's like interested in sort of
sales pitch it's called.
Oh yeah, okay. And then like that, like he likes to bring in like all this crazy stuff, but he, in some ways, like the core science fictional conceit is usually, what if 50s families and suburban life, but on Mars, but 100 years from now, and then this crazy stuff happens, but it starts from this very unscience fictional place in a lot of ways. So yeah, I mean, I think I agree that with what John was saying about the episode, and had this amazing production design, probably the only episode that I think in terms of just like its future tech was like as interesting as Black Mirror can be, but I think that has nothing to do with Dick. I think that's just that they did a great job with the episode. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, I don't mean to give Dick credit where no credit is due, but it's just it's become a thing. Like I mean, I feel like overall, like I was saying before, how it felt like the people adapting these episodes or adapting these stories, took the whole Philip K. Dick oeuvre, like including not just his fiction, but also the movies and everything that had been adapted. And they sort of had that all in their minds as they were adapting these and or, directing and producing these episodes. And so there's a lot of these different elements from different forms of Philip K. Dick's work, like mostly from, the movies that we've seen, but like sort of get distilled into this that sort of adds this sort of Dickian aspect to it, even if it's largely created by Hollywood, rather than from his actual fiction. But yeah, so I mean, I just think it's kind of interesting where it's like, it's almost like this is like a postmodern, a way of approaching, adaptation where you're taking in all of these, disparate elements that didn't have anything to do with the original and distilling it and pouring it into this new endeavor.
Well, let me say, John, I mean, I think that, I think this show is sort of mixed success to my mind, but one thing I did really feel is that everyone involved respects Philip K. Dick and was trying to make it good. And there's even this, this anthology. If you want to read the stories that the episodes are based on, they put out a little anthology, and the people who did the adaptations have a little introduction to each story. And they just seem to have a lot of love for the material and respect for the material. And Anthony mentioned Philip K. Dick's daughter is an executive producer. So this doesn't feel to me like, they're like, oh, we bought the rights to Philip K. Dick's name, and now we're going to put out some shit and put his name on, and people will,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. I think, and like I said, I believe Bryan Cranston was one of the key forces in getting this made, and it's because he's a huge fan of Philip K. Dick, and so I think a lot of love went into this. It's just that, yeah, I agree. It's definitely been a mixed success. But yeah, so the book you're talking about is called Electric Dreams. It's just a collection of these 10 stories by Philip K. Dick. It's actually published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, where my imprint is, but it's not part of my imprint, but Houghton Mifflin Harcourt did publish it, so that was kind of a cool discovery. Yeah, and they actually own the rights to all of Philip K. Dick's work, so yeah, and so I actually asked my boss, I was like, so how did that book come together? And so it's I guess, they decided they were doing this show. And so, they just said, hey, well, we control all the rights to the Philip K. Dick stories. So how about we do a book, just those stories? And then, got the commentary from the show creators and everything. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Is there anything else anyone wants to say about Kill All Others? We sort of touched on that briefly. I feel like there's a lot to talk about in that episode, although it wasn't my favorite. But so the premise base, I mean, and it actually uses sort of the premise of the story, which basically is that there's a dead body hanging in public, and you kind of ask people, what's with that dead body? And everyone's just like, oh, I'm sure it's there for a reason. I'm sure the authorities are on top of it, and capturing really well, I think, the sense that we all have, in the modern age right now where, because it's I don't know if you've ever witnessed a crime or something like that, but it takes people a long time to realize something is wrong. Even, if someone gets shot or something, because you're just so in your routine. And it's really hard for a human being to say oh wait, this is an emergency situation. I need to act differently than I have ever acted before.
Right.
And we sort of are experiencing that sort of phenomenon, as an entire society right now. And the story captures that.
Yeah, and I felt like the story could just needed a few things edited out. It was one of those stories that suffered because a couple of things were kept in there that should have seen were a little too heavy-handed. The part where, the all the guys that work in the factory are sort of sitting at a picnic table, and, one of them says, "You seem sad, you should buy something." And, it's really, do we really need, science fiction has already delved into this problem fairly considerably. We really don't need something that just outright says it. And, it could have been such a more powerful story if they hadn't done that. And especially because to me, it was sort of the most Trumpian story. I've been sort of salivating, with, as we go through this horrible period in American history, I've been waiting for the art response and, with great anticipation, because there's going to be a lot. I feel like it's going to take people more time to digest everything that's going on. But when it happens, there's going to be a lot, and it's going to be wonderful, and some of it's going to be terrible. But I can't wait. So I feel like this was sort of a overtly Trumpian tale. But it was already so obvious, and they just threw in a couple of lines in there and a couple of scenes that really, you don't need to bang us over the head with it. We get it.
Yeah, when I read the description of this one, I was really excited by it because I thought it sounded like, oh yeah, like, no, that sounds like a really great, powerful, story. But then, yeah, I don't know, just, I wish it was better. It was just so poorly done overall that, yeah, it's just like we said earlier, it's like just like hitting us over the head with everything. It's just like so clumsy and everything that it's just like I can't really say I enjoyed it overall. And it's like, even though I was really rooting for it because of the different social commentary that was embedded in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird thing because like no one in the episode seems to be acting the way a normal human being would act, especially those coworkers. They almost seem sort of like robotic or like, and I agree that it doesn't quite work, but like there's something about like it's not, because again, like knowing, at least having seen one other movie that the director has made, like it seems it was like a very deliberate effect that they were going for. I'm not sure that they got there, but like I can't even quite describe it, but it's just like so unsettling, like while it was happening. It also like kind of led me down some dead ends, like especially that scene where they were like, oh, you should buy something. And I thought, oh, I wonder if like this is going to go towards more some sort of this like kind of like solipsistic kind of story where actually everyone here is like playing him for some reason, but like, and it didn't, so it was, I couldn't exactly explain, and like, I couldn't tell you exactly how, how the factory stuff relates to the political propaganda stuff, but it was like also kind of like we were saying earlier, like just, it felt like I was going crazy as the character was going crazy, that it kind of works for me.
Well, and why do you need to call up the sexy butter girl or whatever? Why is it not just, because I could understand, it would be interesting if it was like such like a neo-Victorian society or something where sex, like your access to sexual material was so controlled that the butter girl is like the best you can do. But it didn't seem like that sort of society at all. It seems like it seems like they would just have like pornography everywhere because like anything that's going to distract people from the political situation, whatever. So yeah, just like stuff like that. It was just like you're saying, I guess, just sort of like weird elements that didn't. They weren't like all rowing in the same direction,
Right.
Well, they probably have repealed net neutrality and they kept it repealed, and so they just there's a real premium on porn content. So you can get the butter girl for free by buying the butter. So,
well, that was the thing, is like if it had been free, it would have made sense. But like the fact that you have to buy the products to get this sort of like sanitized semi softcore porn seems like really unsatisfying.
Oh, well, actually, it wasn't butter; it was cheese. But you can eat the cheese at least. It's like maybe it's too much cheese. You don't need that much cheese, but at least you get the cheese.
Right. Or when she comes back, she's like, "I got a lot of coffee. It's all decaf. Don't worry."
Yeah.
And she throws it all out.
Well, but I thought the wife situation made a little bit more sense because, and I thought that would sort of work as satire, is that like people have a closer emotional connection to Ronald McDonald or Tony the Tiger or something than they do to like actual real people. Yeah. If they're getting some sort of emotional reward out of it, some sort of like fake relationship, but a relationship, but just for like pure sexual titillation or something, it doesn't really make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Right, and well, the fact that it's also emotional makes it like that initial scene where she's just kind of leaning on him, like it sort of makes it feels believable in the sense that it's this thing where no one is acknowledging that that's what you're getting out of it, but that's what it is. Versus like when you get to the cheese girl and she's just like lifting her skirt up, you're like, yeah, everybody knows, so like why not just go to like pornography then?
It's like they were trying really hard to add that campy feel, but it doesn't mesh with the rest of the episode.
All right, so we haven't really talked about the father thing. I don't know if there's much to say about this. I feel like, if you've seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Puppet Masters, etc., this added absolutely nothing that we haven't seen a million times before.
Yeah, I mean, and it seemed like they were, I don't know how cynically they were doing this, but in some ways it seemed like a riff also on like a Stranger Things kind of vibe where it's like kids teaming up, except none of the kids were that memorable, so it made it a lot less successful. for me.
Yeah, totally. I said that this was the Stranger Things episode, and like, Safe and Sound was the Black Mirror episode. Although I guess Autofac was also kind of Black Mirror episode. But yeah, totally. Yeah, and I was really disappointed to see that this story was the one from FNSF because I used to work at FNSF and I love that magazine. But it's like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I guess they can't all be winners. But and admittedly, I didn't read the story. I don't expect that it's too great. I mean, based on this premise, but I mean, I like the actor that played the kid, and of course Greg Kinnear is good. But I thought the woman that plays the wife, I mean, she's a great actress. She's in The Killing, and I thought she was like just totally wasted in this episode. It's like they could have cast anyone. Like she didn't have anything to work with in this episode.
Yeah, she was just sort of there.
Yeah. It's like that was like a waste of a good actress. I mean, although the show did a very good, interesting job of casting people. Like, and there's a lot of like pretty famous people in some of these episodes. But they could have saved her for one of the other ones that had maybe less talent in it or something. But
yeah, well, I agree with you, John, that the kid was really good. And I think the problem, I mean, Sarah was saying about Crazy Diamonds, like it's a metaphor. I think the problem with this one is that there was no metaphor. Yeah. Like this is a story about a kid who kills an alien bug, and it's like it's not operating on any other level than that.
Right. Totally. No, I agree. I did not enjoy the episode, but
except for when they break the fourth wall and #resist, and you're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, and there's nothing emotionally at stake either because he doesn't. There's no sense that his father, it still has his father's memories, but there's no sense that his father is still in there. He goes immediately from I love you, Dad, to like, what is this crazy alien? So there's nothing like emotionally at stake either.
Right. Well, it's also one of those things where I was like, wait, Philip K. Dick had parental trust issues? You don't say. Like, I mean, it's like. Yeah, it seems a little on the nose for him to even write this story. It's like, well, yeah, come on, guy, we know. But yeah, I don't know. It was not the best source material for sure. If that's what the story is about.
All right. Well, I hate to end things on that note, but that's we've pretty much covered all these episodes at this point, I think. I'll just note that actually. In these story notes in this anthology, a lot of these people involved with the show are involved with like Stranger Things and Man in the High Castle and lots of other really great science fiction shows. And it's the guy who did Crazy Diamonds. I don't know how I feel about that, but it's Tony Grisoni is currently adapting China Miéville's novel The City in the City into a television series for the BBC.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So,
well, he's also Terry Gilliam's like frequent co-writer, which totally makes sense to me.
It makes perfect sense.
Oh, and Travis Beacham, who wrote Pacific Rim, he wrote the screenplay for Autofac. So who is the or which episode had the person from Stranger Things?
I don't remember actually.
Oh, okay. I wonder if it was the father thing, since that was the Stranger Things episode. It's like, hey, we need somebody who knows how to work with kids.
I wonder if I could find it here. Let's see. Oh yeah, I just turned to it. Jessica Mecklenburg, who wrote Human Is.
Oh, okay. Come on, Jessica.
I liked that episode.
Yeah, I kind of liked it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the conceit it's kind of obvious where it's going, but like I think it like the performances are so good that like I totally bought it. And when we say it's not just Bryan Cranston, but it's also the actress from The Babadook who plays his wife, and I think she's amazing in it too.
Yeah.
Although I found the ending a little implausible that they're just going to let that guy. They're like, oh, I'm convinced he's not an alien, so let's...
Right.
Yeah, that required a little bit of suspension of disbelief. But actually, let me say, I mean, I'm just, I don't know if you guys have read China Miéville's City in the City, but that's an incredibly original, interesting premise, unlike anything that's ever been on television before. So I'd be really interested to see how that turns out.
Well, and seeing it visually, I think is going to be such a different experience from reading it that, like, yeah, I'm just as curious.
So, well, Anthony, actually, since you're a bit of an expert, well, I guess Dave, you've read all of his stories, you said. So, I mean, of things that have not already been adapted, like, do you have any ideas for like what season 2 they should target? Like, since we were sort of questioning the decisions to adapt some of these that they picked in season 1.
Well, see,
Any obvious?
Go ahead.
well, Anthony mentioned the electric ant. That definitely stands
Right.
out in my mind. But the thing with Philip K. Dick stories, like, to me, they're like, it's like Mike and Ike candies or something, where, you eat any individual one, it's like, this is all right. But then you eat like you eat a couple, and then you're like, I can't stop this, and you eat the whole box, and you can't help yourself. And then afterward, like, you don't particularly remember, like, no particular story stands out in your mind. It's just this overall effect of like, wow, that was weird, and I just got bombarded with so many crazy, cool ideas, and it captures this like paranoid worldview so well. I mean, that was one thing rereading these stories that struck me, is just how, like, if I were to write this as a writer and I wanted to capture this sense of paranoia, I don't think I could possibly do it. I mean, I don't think you can fake the level of paranoia that's in these stories, and it just comes through so clearly.
Yeah. That's another reason why it's so disappointing, I think, as a female science fiction fan, because the problem with, I do not understand why PKD had such a wonderful imagination, and whether that imagination was fueled by paranoia or not. Regardless, he had a really cool grasp of being able to look at the world and ask, is any of this real? And the fact that he can't, or he couldn't apply that to gender, that he couldn't apply that, because it really is just a failure of an imagination, to be able to look around at the world and say, all of this could be completely different, except women will still be women. Like, like the fact that he couldn't apply all of that imagination to, and he had a really troubled, I mean, he was married 4 times, so you'd think that he would be able to delve 5 times. So you'd think he'd be able to delve and use those skills and delve into the question of, wait, why do I suck at this? why do these things keep happening? And actually question it the same way that he's questioning everything else. It's just a disappointment.
Yeah, he probably became convinced that each of his wives was actually an android at some point, or an alien, and then he couldn't love them after that.
There you go.
I would say, like, I mean, I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier, is I do think that what he's imaginative about and is not, in some ways, the kind of things that we necessarily think that science fiction writers are going to be imaginative. I think in a lot of ways he thought people are people, society is going to be the same, or at least that's how he wrote it, that it was just like, and that all that stuff is the same. And then there's this crazy stuff externally. So I think that his failure, I mean, to sort of imagine new roles for women, I think is an extent, is not to like excuse that failure, but I think it's to say that it's not that he was actually so imaginative in so other ways. I think the way he describes like the father figures in a lot of his stories is also like reflective of, like, feels very much of the 50s. And again, that doesn't mean that it's not disappointing, but I think that's part of what's going on there. I would also say that I've heard that one of his last novels, The Transmigration of Timothy Archer, is where somebody finally sat him down and said, listen, we got to talk about your attitude towards women. And like, he finally like tried to like make up for it. I actually haven't read it. But I've heard that that's where he actually does a 1% of like trying to redeem himself from a lot of unimaginative writing about women.
Well, I mean, one of his novels, I haven't read it since college, but it's called Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. And there's sort of, from what I remember, a sort of proto-cyberpunk hacker female character in that, who I don't know. I won't testify that she's a great character, but she's at least not a hot secretary or nagging wife. But to Sarah's point too, some lines from this anthology jumped out at me. So one is, Sally swept breathlessly into the living room, her breasts quivering with excitement.
Oh, God.
And June Walton caught the uneasy tone in her son's voice, and her matronly bosoms fluttered with sudden alarm. And I was actually the first I was reading the story out loud, and my girlfriend was kind of working and listening, and like literally after reading that line, I don't think she heard anything else in the story. She was like so like couldn't like stop laughing about that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Ugh, cringe.
Classic. Yeah, actually, you mentioned "Flow My Tears." The Policeman Said, and actually, isn't that in Crazy Diamond? Didn't Steve Buscemi, isn't he singing that like as his passcode thing or whatever? Is that the
yeah? He's singing "Flow My Tears" something or other. Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're talking about, John. Where it's like they like, even when they like departed a lot from the source material, they wanted to have PKD type elements in the stories. And so I thought that was kind of a funny joke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, I guess it's like a it's just an old song that phrase comes from. But like, if you know Philip K. Dick's work, then you know, obviously, like you said, that novel is called that. So yeah, that was kind of a wink to fans.
I just want to add I have one other note here I want to mention is that in Impossible Planet, there's some line about, oh, we've explored every star in the universe and there's just no more mysteries anymore. And that just seems like such a like failure to understand what science fiction is all about to me, especially since this only seems to be maybe 100 or 200 years in the future or something, even if it was 100 million years in the future, that's still a preposterous statement. But it's just it's just like you're really missing the point. You can't conceive of what the universe is and what science fiction is actually supposed to grapple with,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I like the show a lot. But we're pretty much out of time, and I know Anthony has a phone call he has to take. Anybody have any other final thoughts? Anything else you didn't get to mention?
I guess the last thing I wanted to say, and just in terms of comparing it to the written work, is I do think that, again, particularly when you look at the novels from the 60s on, like, there's like the paranoia that Philip K. Dick is really known for, but I think he's capable of a lot of other things, and I think part of that is like this very specific kind of tone, which is this mixture of like resignation and hope, which you would get in like Ubik or parts of The Man in the High Castle or Martian Time Slip or The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, and on and on. Most of the famous novels have it, and I think that part of his writing is only barely captured in the show, like occasionally. So I think like as much as I think I like the show maybe more than some of the others people on here did, but like I still feel like it only captured a tiny part of who he is as a writer.
Well, in one of the story notes, I think it was the Travis Beacham one, I'm not sure, but the person says basically that Philip K. Dick was always writing capital L literature. He was always interested in ideas and philosophy. He was always thinking hard and, writing from his heart and trying to understand the world and understand himself and everything. And that, yeah, I wish these TV episodes did a little bit better job of capturing that. I mean, I think they were definitely trying, but yeah, is that the reason people like Philip K. Dick is because of how hard he thought and how much he questioned about everything around him.
Except for Jen.
Well, except with some with some notable exceptions. All right, cool. So, any other final thoughts?
I'll just say, aside from, I recommend episodes 2, 5, and 6, so you should definitely watch those. Although I can't really recommend the show overall otherwise, I really want it to succeed because I want more anthology shows to happen. So if you have Amazon Prime, just at least play every episode, even if you're gonna walk out of the room and not watch it. Like, we gotta track those downloads, those streams. They gotta think that we're all watching it so that they think it's very popular. And then go rate it on Amazon. Give it 5 stars. I don't care if you don't like it. I didn't like it that much and I'm gonna give it 5 stars, God damn it.
Yeah, I'm with David. I would watch 100 of these easily.
All right, so yeah, I think that's a good note to end on. Go post fraudulent 5-star reviews on Amazon. And so we've been speaking with John Joseph Adams, Sarah Lynn Mishner, and Anthony Ha. So guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to John Joseph Adams, Sarah Lynn Mishner, and Anthony Ha for joining us on the show. Big thanks as well to David McNamara and Arturo Sanchez, who both just signed up this week to support us on Patreon. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time or fixed monthly contribution, you can do that via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to George Turcotte, who just signed up to make monthly payments via PayPal, and to Greg Poyer, who just made a very generous one-time contribution. Greg writes, "Best recommendation is to tell you I listened to over a dozen podcasts, and yours is the only donation I've made. After listening for more than 2 years, this seems a pittance, but the best I can do at this time." So big thanks again to David, Arturo, George, and Greg, and to everyone else who's contributed. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank Serial Box for sponsoring today's show. Check out their urban fantasy series Book Burners, and remember that you can get a discount on the first season of any Serial Box series by visiting serialbox.com and using the promo code GEEK18. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.